All right. Well, thank you again, everyone, for being here. We're going to go ahead and get started. First thing, we'd like to make an announcement about our language translation interpretation that's available for today's workshop. So with that, I'm going to introduce Marisela, our Spanish language interpreter. Marisela?
Thank you, Andy. Buenas tardes y bienvenidos sean todos. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos hoy. Vamos a explicar las funciones necesarias para acceder a la interpretación simultánea al español. Si están sintonizándonos desde su computadora portátil o computadora de escritorio, en un minuto y después de esta explicación van a localizar el icono con figura del mundo o el globo terráqueo en la parte inferior de su pantalla y cuando este aparezca pulsen en Language Interpretation y luego después van a seleccionar el idioma español o Spanish y si están sintonizándonos desde su teléfono, iPad, o dispositivo similar, busquen el menú con los 3 puntitos o donde dice More en la esquina superior del lado derecho de su pantalla y pulsen Interpretación del lenguaje o Language Interpretation y de nuevo Spanish o español. Muchas gracias. Thank you, Andy.
Marisela, thank you very much. Good. So with that, we'll move into a little bit more overview of some of our Zoom logistics. We very much encourage a lot of engagement as part of these workshops. I think those of you who are familiar. And so one of the ways we'll be doing that, we'll have a few methods to do that. One of them will be using the chat feature. We strongly encourage and recommend that you send any questions and comments in through the chat, really at any time during the workshop today. It really helps us to be able to record your ideas. And as you can see, as many of you are probably familiar, it's the chat button on your Zoom controls. And additionally, you're also welcome to speak over the audio. We'll be able to unmute you at the right time when we have everyone queued up during our discussion period. So make sure you look for the raise hand feature, and we have colleagues here who will be able to answer any questions that you may have as well. And just again, a reminder, if you're joining us by smartphone or perhaps on tablet, depending on the control settings, this is where you can find the chat and raise hand features. So first of all, let me introduce myself here briefly. My name is Andy Pendoli. I'm with MIG. We're part of the team that the County of San Diego has brought on to support development of the regional decarbonization framework, very specifically to support the outreach and engagement. We have a really great agenda here today. We're focused today on the energy sector specifically. So those of you who've been working in this, tracking this process know that the work is organized by 4 sectors: energy, building and industry, transportation, and land use. So we've been organizing in that way. Today is focused specifically on energy overall. The data being shared today is focused on that. And we have a number of key subject matter experts, part of the technical team here to help answer questions for all of you around those topics. But most importantly, we're really interested in hearing your thoughts and ideas and reactions to some of the emerging takeaways, some of the data that's emerging about the potential for our region when it comes to the energy sector and broader decarbonization. So we'll talk more about many more opportunities for engagement in this process a little bit later. But for now, I want to move us right into the presentation. We have a relatively short presentation, about 20 minutes long. And we'd appreciate you all taking this first 20 minutes to hear the presentation overview and just kind of soaking in the information, the data, and then we'll be able to spend the balance of our time hearing from you. We have some questions we want to ask you for response, but most importantly, we're here to answer questions and hear additional comments and reactions that you have about this topic. So that's our brief kind of agenda overview for today. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce Elise Hansen with the County of San Diego. She's a management fellow in the Land Use and Environment Group. And Elise is going to spend the next, as I said, about 20 minutes or so going over some latest data emerging from the energy sector perspective of the regional decarbonization framework. So with that, Elise, please, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Andy. Good afternoon. I'm Louise Hansen, and I'm a management fellow in the Land Use and Environment Group, or LUGE's executive office. In addition to the LUGE team, we also have Emily Leslie here with us today. She was the lead author for the RDF's technical report, Chapter 2, entitled Geospatial Analysis of Renewable Energy Production. Emily is a national expert on renewable energy siting, GIS, and California energy systems. She's the principal at Montara Mountain Energy and has offered invaluable contributions to this project. She'll be available to answer any questions after this brief presentation. So before we begin discussing renewable energy and the technical report, we want to start by recognizing that there are communities in the San Diego region that face unjust conditions and circumstances related to the environments in which they live. The tribal nations of the San Diego region are an example of one community that has historically faced such impacts. We would like to recognize those injustices with a land acknowledgement from our team. We acknowledge the harmony that existed between the land, nature, and its original peoples, who have since endured displacement, persecution, and systemic oppression. We pay our respect to the unceded territory and homelands of the 17 tribal nations in our region, the most of any county in the United States, from 4 cultural groups: the Kumeyaay, Diegueño, the Luiseño, the Cupeño, and the Kuya. As climate change increasingly threatens our region, its peoples, and its cultural identities, we aspire to learn from Indigenous traditional knowledge in undoing the injustices of the past. Recognizing the need for a regional approach to addressing climate change, in January last year, the Board of Supervisors voted to create the Regional Decarbonization Framework. This framework is intended to provide science-based pathways to inform policymaking in regional, county, and city governments towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the San Diego region. It is separate from, but complements, ongoing climate action planning efforts by local governments. The framework is a visionary document being developed collaboratively through public-private partnerships and community input. It will provide strategic and strategies and initiatives to move towards zero carbon emissions in the region. There are 3 components of the integrated framework. First, the technical report that was prepared by UC San Diego and some of the nation's leading experts on energy modeling. Today's presentation and discussion will be primarily based on this report. Second, a workforce development study by Inclusive Economics to ensure that our local workers benefit from climate investments. And third, implementation pathways. While there will be many studies, discussions, and recommendations throughout this process, actual decarbonization results will come from the implementation of policies, programs, and projects by all of us working together. Here's our timeline. We are currently in the policy and program development phase, and there is an open comment period for the technical and workforce reports that is open through May 31st. From now through August, we will continue to work on the workforce development study and the implementation pathways. In August, we intend to present the integrated framework with all 3 of the components I described earlier to the board for approval. The final fully integrated framework is intended to help policymakers identify opportunities for collaboration across sectors and jurisdictional boundaries. We would like to recognize some of the commenters who provided the consultants with invaluable feedback on how to improve the chapter in terms of additional or improved analyses and data visualizations, energy setting scenarios, and context. We are grateful for the time that these stakeholders took to provide feedback, which improved this analysis and the entire report. Regionally, the single largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions are, in order, on-road transportation of light-duty vehicles, electricity generation, natural gas use in buildings, and on-road transportation of heavy-duty vehicles. Together, these 4 emissions categories account for 80% of regional emissions. These emissions are measured in carbon dioxide equivalent, which is a way to compare the planet warming effects of carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and other greenhouse gases using a single metric. To address these regional emissions, the technical report modeled pathways to decarbonization for electricity, transportation, and buildings. Additionally, the report analyzed natural climate solutions and land use considerations for regional decarbonization. This presentation will focus on the regional emissions that are produced by electricity generation and how meeting future electricity demands to decarbonize transportation, buildings, and other sectors can be supported by renewable energy. The renewable energy production analysis considered the ways in which renewable energy infrastructure build-out can produce sufficient energy to decarbonize the electricity sector in the San Diego region. This analysis began with mapping the areas that have the physical characteristics and minimum economic viability to produce renewable energy. This is known as techno-economic potential. This map shows the total regional techno-economic potential of utility-scale solar energy. The colors show the levelized cost of energy for each square, which represents individual candidate project areas. Levelized cost of energy, or LCOE, represents the cost of wholesale energy production and is measured in units of cost per megawatt hour of energy produced. This is used as a metric to compare energy project costs to each other. The LCOE includes capital and interconnection costs for developing the project. Yellow candidate project areas have the lowest LCOE for the project, and dark purple have the highest LCOE. This metric allows for a comparison of the relative costs of building projects per energy output. This map shows the utility scale solar potential is available throughout the region, but it is most concentrated in the unincorporated areas and tends to have a lower LCOE in the unincorporated regions. This map shows the total regional techno-economic potential of utility scale onshore wind. Compared to solar, there's drastically less onshore wind potential in the region, and unlike solar, it is exclusively in the unincorporated regions. The onshore wind potential is concentrated in the southeastern area of the county, where it is also generally least expensive relative to other onshore wind projects shown here. The analysis also included the techno-economic potential of Imperial County to allow for imperial resources to be included in some of the scenarios. This map shows the total solar and onshore wind potential in both San Diego and Imperial counties. The colors again show the levelized cost of energy, with yellow being the least expensive and purple being the most expensive per megawatt hour. This map shows that there is more solar and wind potential in the Imperial County region than in the San Diego region, primarily due to the differences in geography and climate between the regions. In addition to the utility scale solar and onshore wind shown in the previous slides, this map shows additional resource potential. Among the additional resources are brownfield wind and solar, shown as blue and red dots, respectively. Brownfield sites are those that are currently or were previously contaminated. Examples include mines, landfills, and industrial sites. Shown here in black is the full possible extent of rooftop solar. The potential Imperial County geothermal sites are shown here as green circles. And finally, this map shows wave energy and onshore wind energy potential. These resources were not included in the chapter's scenarios, but their techno-economic potential is shown here and was calculated within the report. These resources were not included because neither is deployable by local jurisdictions and because wave energy is not yet available at scale under current technology. The extent of possible wave energy, as defined by a water depth of 200 meters or fewer, is shown as a green line off the coast, while the extent of offshore wind potential is shown as blue squares off the coast. The lighter blue squares have lower levelized cost of energy, and the darker squares have higher levelized cost of energy. There are numerous high-level technical takeaways from this analysis. It is important to state that these are technical findings from UC San Diego and other contractors and do not represent recommendations to or from the county. The first takeaway from this analysis is that there is suitable land area in the San Diego region to meet demand. This graph shows energy potential measured in gigawatt hours. The rightmost dark gray bar shows estimated 2050 annual energy demand for the San Diego region, which is estimated to be about 50,000 gigawatt hours a year. The leftmost bar shows the total utility scale solar and wind potential in the San Diego region, where the vast majority of the potential comes from solar. The middle bar shows utility scale solar and wind, as well as the additional resources mentioned in the previous slide, with notable additional potential coming from geothermal, which is the green bar, brownfield solar, which is the orange bar, and solar infill, which is the brown bar on top. This graph shows that it is possible to meet regional energy demand with the utility scale solar and wind resources available in the region. Additionally, it shows that in order to exceed demand, additional resources from outside of the region, including Imperial's resources and offshore wind, or non-utility scale resources like infill solar, brownfield development, and rooftop solar will be necessary. The second takeaway is that the analysis demonstrates that it is possible to prioritize different policy goals, outcomes, and/or costs under a variety of site selection scenarios. This analysis is useful for visualizing the trade-offs of renewable energy production. The first set of scenarios selected utility scale sites based on cost, selecting the sites from the lowest project LCOE to the highest until the scenario produced 50,000 gigawatt hours of energy to meet 2050 demand. As a result, the scenario chose the fewest possible sites at the lowest total average cost. This figure shows the least cost scenario for the San Diego region only. The three maps show renewable energy build out at 3 time points to reach energy demand by 2050. The average levelized cost of energy for the 2050 map in this scenario is $40.65 per megawatt hour. Using the least cost site selection method, multiple scenarios then applied geographic exclusions under different possible policy goals. These scenarios minimized impacts to land with high monetary value, minimized legal barriers through only selecting sites on lands designated as developable by SANDAG, minimized impacts to lands with high carbon sequestration potential, and shown here, minimized impacts to lands with high conservation value. This scenario does not meet the regional demand because it only generates about 15,000 gigawatt hours of energy, which means that the region would require additional renewable energy generation from more expensive sources within the region, like infill or brownfield solar, or energy from outside of the region, like Imperial resources, to approach a fully decarbonized system. Additionally, the scenario has a higher average LCOE at $84.50 per megawatt hour. An additional analysis focused exclusively on the maximum rooftop and infill solar potential in the region. This scenario was suggested by numerous stakeholders, community members, and commenters as a scenario that should be investigated. Solar infill, shown in purple, in dark purple, is development that occurs in densely populated areas. Examples include solar panels built on empty lots or over outdoor parking areas. Again, rooftop solar extent is shown in black. The scenario analysis found that by maximizing rooftop and infill solar, the region can meet approximately 35% of the 2050 energy demand at an average LCOE of $70 per megawatt hour. As with the previous scenario, this one would also require additional resources to approach decarbonization. Finally, a fourth type of scenario demonstrated a site selection method that attempted to balance competing priorities. Essentially, this shows everything but the kitchen sink in terms of renewable energy sources to meet 2050 demand. This scenario includes rooftop solar, high utilization of brownfield wind and solar sites, utility scale wind and solar on lands designated as developable by SANDAG, Imperial County solar and geothermal, 4-hour battery storage, and pumped storage hydropower. As in previous maps, rooftops are black areas, brownfield solar is shown by red dots, brownfield wind by blue dots, and geothermal by green circles. Additionally, it shows battery storage as gray circles and pumped storage hydropower as a red circle. Utility scale solar and wind are shown by their average LCOE because the scenario selected least cost utility scale sites among the developable areas first. The lowest cost utility scale sites are yellow, which are clustered in the northeast and southeast San Diego region, and the highest are purple, which are in Imperial County. This scenario meets the 2050 energy demand at an average LCOE about $109 per megawatt hour. This is higher than other scenarios because brownfield development has the highest LCOE of any development included in these scenarios. Overall, with this analysis of prioritizing different policy goals, outcomes, and costs, these maps demonstrate that the chapter's analysis is flexible and can help policymakers to design renewable energy siting scenarios that optimize different priorities. The scenarios shown here and in the report are only a few examples and are by no means the only scenarios worth considering. The third takeaway is that there are significant renewable energy resources in Imperial County, including geothermal energy, which is a source of renewable baseload energy. This means that it can provide large quantities of energy that can form the base of energy demand at any given point. This map shows this map shows the solar, wind, and geothermal build out that would need to occur by 2030 to meet regional energy demand. This scenario is also a least cost scenario. This next map shows the build out required by 2040. And this last map shows that the build out required by 2050. The colors correspond to the year when the resource is built, where darker colors are built in later years. This analysis shows that if Imperial solar, wind, and geothermal energy were built and a portion of it transmitted to the San Diego region, then the San Diego region would need to generate much less renewable energy to meet regional demand. However, transmitting these resources may require upgrades to the transmission network. Finally, the scenario, which is a least cost scenario, still selects a large portion of the southeast San Diego region for renewable energy development, which is shown in the map subset on the left, and which is an enlarged view of the red square in the 2050 map shown on the right. The fourth takeaway is that approaching a 100% decarbonized energy system that also meets societal expectations and regulatory standards for reliability will require significant but uncertain investments in a suite of additional resources, including excess, intermittent, and flexible generation, storage, and demand-side management. State agencies plan statewide energy production and storage, and as such have plans for the San Diego region's energy storage infrastructure. State planning includes 4 battery storage sites in the region, with proposed locations in Barrio Logan, Otay Mesa, Escondido, and Carlsbad, as well as a pumped storage hydropower station at the San Vicente Energy Storage Facility. Briefly, pumped storage hydropower is a system where water is pumped uphill from one storage pool to another when solar and wind generation is high, for instance, during the day, and the water is then released downhill through turbines to generate hydropower when solar and wind generation is low, for instance, at night. Pumped storage hydropower can therefore be thought of as a sort of natural battery. This map shows the urban extent in light gray, pumped hydropower as a red circle, and battery storage as dark gray circles, where size indicates storage capacity in megawatts. So finally, here are some broad conclusions to this chapter. First, this chapter provides pathways to meet projected electricity demand using 100% renewable energy. This generation would support regional decarbonization in other sectors that will require high electrification. Second, the scenarios created for this chapter are not prescriptive and are instead demonstrative of the breadth of options available to policymakers when planning for renewable energy generation in the San Diego region and beyond. There are nearly an infinite number of scenarios possible, and these are just a handful of them. So that concludes our presentation, and Marissa, the other LUGE staff, Emily Leslie of Montara Mountain Energy, the EPIC team, and I are happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Elise. Great job. A lot of work goes into, I think, as you can all appreciate, compiling this data, packaging it in a format, and thinking about how we can present this in the most kind of comprehensive, but also as concise way as we can. So graphics, imagery. So just want to acknowledge the team for that. And want to thank you all for your patience in getting through that. We have the balance of our time with you as late as 4 o'clock to respond to comments, respond to questions, hear your comments and ideas and reactions to information coming forward. And I want to, first, a couple things, and I'm going to introduce Murtaza. Just as a quick reminder, I think you all get this, but I want to just to be sure for anybody who may have joined us late, again, best way to be able to engage with us here is in the rest of our time is using the chat function, which many of you are already using, which is great. But also, if you'd like to speak over the audio, absolutely use the Zoom raise hand feature, and we're happy to take you in turn. We'll be able to unmute you so you can speak. And that would be best way for us to be able to manage that. And again, just in case anyone's on a smartphone using Zoom, again, it's just a sense of the controls. The 3 dots on the bottom right corner should pop up the chat and the raise hand options for you. So with that, I do want to briefly, before we do have a couple questions we want to pose to you, but before I even get to that, I want to introduce Murtaza Baksu Musa. He's going to just provide few more words of welcome. I know a little bit more context, and I know he'll introduce some of the team members who have already been, by the way, responding to some of the questions in the chat. I want to thank Emily Leslie, has already responded to a few. Let's see, and I believe, I apologize, I wanted to acknowledge Gordon McCord, also part of the project teams, responded a little bit. So definitely encourage all of you, if you're not typing things into the chat, take a look at the chat. There's some back and forth happening. We'll acknowledge all those comments and questions here briefly as well over the audio. But before we get into that, let's have Murtaza please go ahead, and then we'll start getting into Q&A with everyone. So.
Thank you, Andy. Really, thank you very much for the turnout today. We really appreciate your time. And just want to round off, the team that is present here today includes besides Gordon McCord and Scott Anders, Elena Creed and Julie Top from the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. And I also wanted to acknowledge the government agency officials are present here today, besides the team from the county, from the federal U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, state Senator Proton Atkins' office, regional agencies, San Diego Association of Governments, and San Diego Air Pollution Control District. Thank you very much, APCD, for sending your team here. There are several cities here: Chula Vista, La Mesa, Carlsbad, San Diego, Encinitas, and I might have missed a couple. If you want, you can, in your name, just put in your affiliation with your city. It will make it easier for us to identify you. And I wanted to give a real hearty shout out to every single one of you stakeholders that has paid interest consistently through this process and is here today, because you are interested and we can together make this work. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Andy, and let us dive into the details.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you, Murtaza. Appreciate that, and for acknowledging the team. And so, yeah, let's definitely move forward. In a couple minutes, I'd like to introduce a couple questions for all of you to do some initial response. But again, most of what we want to do is hear from all of you. And Mike Bullock, thanks for coming back. I know you've been an active, ongoing participant. Let me go ahead and you can unmute yourself here, and why don't you kick things off over the audio. And I appreciate all the comments in the chat as well. So thanks, Mike. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. People that know me know that my focus is transportation, but some stuff is pretty easy here with respect to energy and with Ukraine and with our energy emergency and how fast we need to reduce our energy use for many reasons. And so, I do believe that municipal government should not be allowing methane to be hooked up into units anywhere. No, and as far as I know, Encinitas is the only one that's even doing anything like that down here in San Diego County. So I don't know why we're so slow on that, but that's important. But that's not the main thing I wanted to talk about. I want to talk about all of the solar energy which is falling on all of the parked cars and wrecking all of those beautiful paint jobs. You know, I got a new Tesla. I've never had a new car before, and I don't like it to be out in the sun. You know, and you did some good work in determining, you know, where the sun is and how much there is, the quantification and so on and so forth. And I wish I could tell you how many hundreds of acres we have in surface car parking, but I can't, sorry, but I'll tell you this, it's a lot. And it's being totally mismanaged. The county is ignoring what the plaintiffs proposed 9 years ago when they sued very successfully the county's climate action plan, because it was focused on parking. And if you had a good car parking vendor, that vendor would know how to operate parking in an economically equitable way and so on and so forth. But that's over on the transportation sector, right. So I'll avoid those details. But they will, if you operate car parking efficiently, if that's your job, if you're a vendor that does that for a living, then you will know how to finance solar canopies. You'll know how to have charging stations, how to charge for those charging stations. You'll have energy storage. You'll know how to sell energy to energy districts and so on and so forth. So that is a whole area that I'd like to see you acknowledge and do some work there. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mike. You know, it's good, just my personal reflection on your comments. It's a good example of where, as much as we're looking at the 4 sectors of the RDF, this effort kind of independently in these sector workshops, right? Today's the first focus on energy. We acknowledge obviously the overlap, the connection among all of them. So we just wanted to, as part of our process, want to take the opportunity to look at that. But appreciate you reminding of what those opportunities can continue to look like, you know, as we make those connections. So I want to go ahead and, you know, in a moment, Carl, I see your hand, and in a moment I want to come to you. So thank you for your patience. But I do also want to kick things off in terms of a little bit of our other interactive features. Would love to hear from all of you. And just putting up on screen here, just a reminder, kind of just a summary perspective here, you know, overall about, you know, the reminder about the state executive orders that I think you all probably well know, right, about energy production being from renewable sources by 2045, that our region can physically produce enough renewable energy to meet those mandates, but with trade-offs. And so again, the reporting we've seen so far is really looking at several scenarios that prioritize different policies like rooftop solar, minimizing loss of lands with high conservation value, et cetera. And it includes, you know, a scenario that mixes several of these priorities called a mid-range scenario. And as Elise Hansen mentioned at the very end of her presentation, this is just the start of looking at what scenarios can be. So they are certainly not prescriptive yet. All that said, I want to introduce a first question for all of you, a polling question, just as a facilitative question to kind of take the pulse of the group who's here. And just check in with you first, you know, what strategy is your top priority as part of a collection of regional energy decarbonation strategies? And for the sake here, just asking you to start with one, you know, as your top. But again, looking at protecting lands with high conservation value, prioritizing urban infill, protecting lands with high monetary value, only developing in areas that are currently designated as developable, bringing in more energy from outside the region, not bringing in energy from outside the region, all of the above, or other. And again, this is just, again, it's just a conversation starter, if you will, to just kind of get a sense. So my colleague's gonna go ahead and put up the Zoom poll. We'll take about 60 seconds. Go ahead and indicate what you like. And if you've got kind of an other answer or wanna add more context, please in the chat, come on in and tell us more details about you know, how you react to this question, you know, where you start from as a priority strategy as part of a collection of strategies overall. Again, acknowledging it's going to take multiple strategies moving forward. So, okay, good. All right, I see some, good, I see some additional answers coming in. Not all of the above, but a few of the answers to find the one choice. That's certainly fine, I understand, thank you. We appreciate you working with our format here of engagement. So, all right, almost 2/3 of you voted. I'll give you about a 10-second warning if you haven't chosen one, just on the poll for now. All right. Just about 3/4 of you weighed in. Let's go ahead and just show the results here. All right, so we'll honed in on a couple, kind of rose to the top here as a starting point. So protecting those lands with high conservation value, prioritizing urban infill, but certainly some other recommendations, some other preferences you all, some of you noted. And again, appreciate what is noted in the chat as well. So we'd love to hear more from you on kind of just building off of this question, your thoughts and ideas. But with that, let's come to Carl. Carl, thanks for waiting. You should be able to unmute yourself now. What did you want to weigh in? What are your thoughts here?
Thanks, Andy. I wanted to acknowledge something that Nate Fairman said in the comments, and that is that traditionally utility solar helps union workers. And I just want to point out that that's not something that we can't change in terms of infill, solar infill. So we can be building in the urban areas, the suburban areas, we can put rooftop solar on with union labor. We just have to make that change. And the majority of the cost traditionally for rooftop solar has been sales, marketing, permitting, and all of those things can go away if we start to streamline the process, if we make a pipeline of work for all of our workers here in San Diego. So I don't think this should be a case where we have labor prioritizing the desert solar necessarily. If we were to provide union jobs, that would help all of our laborers that are working on solar today. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Carl. And I think, Carl, dare say, I think you're probably familiar. There's part of this process too. Many of you are familiar. There's also kind of a workforce development analysis and report as part of the RDF, at least touching on, focused on how the workforce, what workforce considerations and efforts need to be considered, if not moved into place, to address at least, not the least of which Carl has spoken to, and many other factors when it comes to how a changed economy, affects workforce overall. So Carl, thank you for that. Appreciate that. And then Sonia, thank you for waiting. Good to see you again. Thanks for being here. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, Andy, and hi staff from the county and everyone else who's joining us today. I appreciate this level of engagement. I wanted just to remind the group that I did inquire on an inquiry, I believe in the last meeting we just had on an outreach, which was very well done. And my questions related to the assumptions of the integrated transmission costs into the LCOE. And so just from a scenario base, because you guys provided scenario based on potential implementations. So just wanted to know if we understand the methodology of how the 89 million transmission project was the only one selected in the LCOE in the plan versus the other, I think like 8 million or significantly more than that, project that were also listed as possibilities. And also would like to introduce one of our board members, Protect Our Communities Foundation's Bill Powers, that may also want to weigh in this.
Great, welcome Bill. Thanks for coming. Thank you, Sonia, for staying involved and very engaged here, very vocal on topics. And with that, I want to, Murtisa, if you could maybe start. I know, I think there was a lot Sonia's got packed on a question, which is great. Maybe you can start with an initial response, and I imagine you might want to bring on a colleague or two to help unpack even further.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Andy, and thank you, Sonia, for providing your question to us. This is the kind of a very interesting perspective that it could lead to in terms of informative exchange of information. I think right from the get-go, when our consultants were brought on board and the ideas they came up with are idea banks. They're not prescriptive positions of the county. Nonetheless, they're ideas that need to be discussed as we get into the implementation phase. So with that, I want to bring in Emily Leslie from Montara that did the runs for this particular question?
Sure. Your question was about, I think it's table 7.3 that has the list of transmission upgrade options, and each transmission upgrade has a associated cost and timeline. Those transmission upgrades in that list are all upgrades that have been studied by the Cal ISO, the California Independent System Operator. That's the grid operator for California. In one of my parallel projects, I'm involved with the CPUC Integrated Resource Plan, which provides the modeling assumptions which form the basis of the Cal ISO's transmission planning process. And so that one transmission upgrade project that's highlighted green in that table was the one that was identified as needed in the Cal ISO 2021 transmission plan. And I can provide the link in the chat to the TPP document that provides all the reasoning why that transmission upgrade was selected as needed as compared to all the others options on the table. Does that get to what you were trying to get at with your question?
I'm going to pass this on to Mr. Bill Powers and let him chime in, and before I respond to that, or let him respond to that. If you can't unmute him, that would be great.
Bill, I saw you had a lot of great comments. Thank you in the chat. So perhaps, Bill, we had covered things there.
Yeah, if I could just jump in real quick, Andy, and
sure.
nice to meet you, Emily. And I just put that in the chat in the interest of saving some time, and so you could see the issue. The point I wanted to make on that $89 million upgrade is that's really an internal reconductoring upgrade, that the ISO points to that being primarily to facilitate, the full deliverability of a bunch of energy storage projects in kind of urban and suburban San Diego, including the pump storage project. And the point that Sonia and I are trying to make here is that you're going to move a lot of new renewable energy from the east, even if it's extreme eastern San Diego County or Imperial County or New Mexico. You're going to have to build another big transmission line. And at the top of that list is a $3.7 billion Imperial to Serrano transmission line. And what I would request on behalf of Protect Our Communities Foundation is that you do that. You assume that you're going to spend $3.7 billion on transmission, not 89 million, and see how that affects the LCOEs. It's
a possibility. Mm-hmm.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Sonia, for that. Really appreciate that. And Bill, thanks for the detailed response also in the chat. Really helpful.
You're welcome.
For us, for taking notes and getting all the commentary from all of you today as well. So I wanted to also acknowledge, again, the team's been answering questions where they can in the chat that have come in. And for those who haven't kind of tracked that too closely, let's see, I believe we've had a few responses provided. I know Emily responded, for example, to Bill's question. I see Bill coming on here in a moment over audio, asking about the desert renewable energy utility scale facilities. And that, yes, the Imperial Solar sites have lower LCOE, but higher transmission costs and land impacts, and some more specifics there. Bill, we'll bring you on in just a moment. Thank you for being here. Want to also acknowledge, I think Frank Landis asked a question about if the model citing of long-term storage along the coast takes sea level rise by 2050 into account. And I don't know if the team answered that yet or not in the chat. I don't think I see that. So I'll ask the team to go ahead and respond to that if they can in the chat as well. And I know Dennis Will, I believe you had a couple questions as well. For example, asking if we considered residential and commercial rooftop solar integrated with battery storage as part of the analysis. And yeah, we can definitely look at that at kind of a next level scenario analysis. It's another good example of just, there's so many ways we can kind of package, right, scenarios and approaches and strategies, and appreciate all of your ideas coming forward that for further study and analysis as we move along. So I just want to acknowledge some of those questions. Our team's going to continue to try to answer them in the chat when and where they can. So with that, Bill Tippett, thanks for waiting. You should be able to unmute now. Go ahead. What did you want to share over audio?
Okay, thanks very much. Another nice informative presentation from you guys. I want to follow up a little bit, and maybe Emily can tell us where we can find it in the documents, if someone can. I'm a little confused about how the levelized cost of energy applies when you start looking at putting a huge number of solar, utility scale solar arrays and wind stuff in the Hukumba, and maybe even in the mountain ridges, because those areas are known as critical habitat for Pacific Peninsula bighorn sheep and other things like that. So we definitely want to avoid that. But there's a fairly good model for how to assess the desert resources in terms of renewable energy. And that was the DRECP, which has been an approved document that gets used throughout the desert areas, although it didn't analyze this areas, as I recall. So Emily, can you tell us roughly how your analysis kind of compares to the DRECP approach? Because to me, I'll set up in a second, it seems like when you look at the map that showed, okay, if we avoid all the high conservation value areas, essentially eliminated everything in the eastern part of the county in terms of siting utility scale stuff. And that seemed to be a fairly heavy-handed approach, when I think there are some areas that are probably legitimate for it, but I really couldn't tell. And so maybe you can also tell me just where in the technical report we can read more details about how the analysis was done. Sorry, a long-winded comment call.
Sure. Mert, is it okay to dive in?
Yeah, thank you, Emily.
Yeah, the DRECP is an excellent example of landscape scale planning for renewable energy, and I'm super familiar with that document and have used it in a lot of my work. We did not add a DRECP overlay here, and I'm not sure whether much of the planning area overlaps with the DRECP planning area. If it does, one additional overlay we could do would be to see if there are any DFAs, development focus areas, that occur within the planning area, because those are areas that have been indicated by the agencies as preferred and to be prioritized for renewable energy development. So there could be transmission planning to try to prioritize those areas to avoid impacts to high conservation value lands. I would probably prefer to follow up with you offline if you want to talk about in detail about how the areas of conservation value were identified. I can put the link in the chat to a paper we published recently called Low Impact Land Use Pathways for Deep Decarbonization that describes some of the work that was done in collaboration with the Nature Conservancy to identify high conservation value areas that should be avoided. And then we can follow up offline if there's more discussion needed.
Right. We'll thank you. Yeah, Emily, thanks for the response, and Bill for the question. I do want to let everybody know soon we'll have part of the project team members will put the best links that we have into the chat to link to reports that are available for viewing at this point, at least in the process. So there you go. Well, I know Emily put one in there, but more specific, there we go. There's the Engage platform that the project team has set up as part of this process. And if the project documents are not there, then we'll put in another link in the chat shortly for all of you to be able to find them. So thank you for that. I do want to introduce one more kind of question for all of you, another polling question here, just again to spur some reaction, some response from all of you about key topics. And so speaking of citing locations, and then we'll come to Bob Leiter, who I know has wanted to provide some input. But first, would like to go through this polling question with you. Which aspect of energy production and renewable energy siting, or location choice, is most important to you and your community? Which consideration is most important? Again, just challenging you for now to pick one as a priority choice. So again, more renewable energy sooner, lower cost to consumers, lower transmission costs, more localized production, more investment in batteries, less investment in batteries, all of the above or other. So let's go ahead and put that polling question up here for everybody. Yeah, go if you don't mind. We'll just take a minute, just because again, it's it's always helpful for the team kind of take the pulse of the group on some of these considerations and what rises to the top for you when it comes to location choice. Some kind of top criteria, I guess, is really what this is about. Be really helpful to see, get your thoughts here. And then in a few minutes, we'll open up the audio again briefly. So, and then after we hear from Bob Leiter, Mirza will come back on. He's going to respond to at least a couple questions in the chat that we've been seeing as well. So, okay, about 2/3 of you have weighed in. That's pretty good. Yeah, let's go ahead and just show the results for those who've weighed in. All right, so more sooner than later for some of you here. Lower cost to consumers definitely rises up there. Localized production, lower cost. Okay, good, thank you. And again, not just put it forward, not in the sense of like, let's just choose one criterion, but just a sense of relative priority, what kind of rises to the top for you. Thank you for that responding, and more comments in the chat are great around your answers would be helpful. But with that, yeah, let's go ahead. Robert Leiter, sorry, Bob, I know you go by Bob. Thanks for being here. You should be able to unmute, Bob. Good to see you.
Thank you. I agree. It's been a very interesting presentation. I have a question though. When I looked at the first graph that showed the regional emissions of greenhouse gases measured in carbon dioxide equivalent, and there were several categories. One of them was called electricity, and it showed about 20% of total GHGs produced by electricity. Another one showed natural gas use in buildings at 12%, and then there's a large other GHG emitting activities that isn't really specified. And my question is, if we're really looking at strategies to reduce GHGs in our region to a really significant level, it seems like with regard to natural gas, you're really only looking at things you could do to reduce the demand for natural gas in buildings, at least from what I understood from a response to one of my questions. But it seems that either the region or the state could actually take actions that will reduce the supply of natural gas into the San Diego region, since we are, as I understand it, mostly an importer of natural gas. We don't produce it in the region. So I wondered why that, or if that is analyzed, and if not, why not? And then I also know that the public utilities, the IOUs like SDG&E, I believe are still interested in building peaker plants that would add additional capacity, electricity capacity in the region. And in many cases, those are fueled with either natural gas or other fossil fuels. So it seems like that would be another source of GHG that either the region or the state would be able to directly regulate. So my question is whether those two have been looked at, and if not, why they haven't been looked at.
Great, Bob. Thank you very much for that. I think we can go straight to Scott Anders with EPIC at University of San Diego to be able to respond to your questions there. Scott, are you able to take this on?
Sure. Hey, Bob. Thanks for the question. There's an other category here because this particular technical report focused on decarbonizing the electric supply, transportation, and buildings. And so your question about natural gas use is in the technical report is, as Emily mentioned in the chat, it is covered in the building decarbonization piece. And the building chapter 5, I think it is, I can't remember exactly, but the building decarbonization chapter also includes some discussion about low carbon fuels, but also kind of how to prune the gas system to kind of remove the supply, or to begin to remove the supply. So it's those items that you mentioned are addressed in a little bit in our chapter, but also in chapter 5. Don't know if that answers your question fully, but.
Yeah, and then I think, Scott, was there awareness, forgive me if you did try to answer this, I know Bob's second part was about some other potential emerging, like peaker plants that might be emerging. Were you able to speak to that as well, in addition to the other 20%?
Yeah, I don't believe the report specifically looked at the use of peaker plants. I know Emily's chapter was looking at renewable siting. So I don't think I don't think there was any specific discussion. And also, I'm not sure how the broader energy modeling handled the peaker plants as well.
That's what I was going to say, is in the broader energy modeling.
Okay, great. All right, thank you both for that. Appreciate that. And so continuing just to check in for everybody kind of on our agenda and our process, we're doing well here. We've got, we've got up to another hour available here to continue to answer questions and hear your comments and thoughts. Your thoughts about, what the takeaways, again, as this is ongoing study, there's more research and analysis underway, but, if there are specific takeaways that, well, excuse me, from the takeaways we presented in the presentation, if you have feelings one way or another emerging about, some directions you feel the region may need to move in very intentionally, be great to hear your thoughts and ideas about what those might be based on some of the emerging findings that we're seeing so far, and also too about areas for further study and analysis as much as we reasonably can in this ongoing process. I think I know everybody here is savvy enough to know that decarbonization will not happen overnight. It will be a long, ongoing, multi-year process, and so opportunities and challenges will continue to evolve, and those opportunities, we may see new opportunities down the line. So what those might be. So very good. I wanted to acknowledge also there were a couple questions. Murtaza, I wanted to come to you if I could, because I don't think it was answered in the chat. So a question a little while ago asking about whether, if or how nuclear power is part and parcel of this consideration of decarbonization. Can you speak, sorry, and the question specifically was from Russ Olson, but that he noted that one of our current renewable power resources being nuclear energy. Is there an intentional kind of exclusion of that resource, or any thoughts on that you can share?
So the way this particular report was structured was based upon feasible methods that are currently existing technologically in the region today. There are many technologies that can be incorporated. We've, like, for example, thought of offshore wind that Emily tried to capture in. So if there is a potential technology that we can anticipate is coming in the future, it's possible to estimate it, but all that it will do is supplement what we currently have in our renewable energy portfolio. The good news is that we can do it. There is enough potential out there. The more we add on to it, it gets us there faster and easier. So that's what I would say, is that there wasn't an intent to pick and choose a technology. It was to say, with what the tools we have today, can we get it done? And then everything that comes on in the future, we're going to add it to our arsenal.
Very good. All right, thank you, Mirza, for doing that. And I wanted to acknowledge too, again, thanks to the team for continue responding to the questions where they can in the chat. And let me just say for everyone, if you've posed a question in the chat and you feel like you haven't gotten an answer, please feel free to come on the audio and we can do that, or mention it again in the chat, and we'll try and be more intentional of not missing you the second time. So our apologies if I missed you. But in the meantime, what I want to just screen sharing with you right now, our colleagues behind the scenes are taking a lot of detailed notes on all the commentary, all the discussion we've been having here. So I wanted to acknowledge them and thank them for doing that. And so either organized by the polling questions we asked of you, but also just all the commentary and discussion that you provided, not only over audio, but in the chat as well. So just wanted to thank them for that. And we've got some kind of doing some simple screenshots of those polling results as we've gone along. So thank you for that. I want to thank the team for getting those notes down, and just let everybody know too, we're working really hard to make sure we've got a lot of redundancies to recording everything here today as part of this workshop and all the workshops. So for example, in addition to recording on that digital whiteboard I was just sharing with you, we're also, of course, video recording the workshop today. The notes in the chat are critical as well. Our team members are taking their own notes. So I think we're covering things pretty well, if I do say so myself. So good. All right. Well, thank you. I see there's Kendall Asuncion, if I'm pronouncing correctly. Let me go ahead. You should be able to unmute now. Thanks for being here. Did you have a comment or a question?
Sure, I had a question and comment. Marissa, you and I had a conversation a little while back about sort of distributed energy resources. And I wanted to ask the broader team, as we're looking at siting, and I know that we looked at capacity in terms of the ability for there to be enough capacity to support electrification, but what is being done to sort of address any resiliency issues? I know that there's been a lot of last summer and the summer before calling on diesel gensets to underpin some of the grid. And I was wondering how or if that has been considered at this time. Thanks.
Sorry, Kendall, this is so this is a great, thank you for that. We've had amazing ideas and support. And this is the information that we are getting in this process is very valuable, and the discussion we're having today in terms of figuring out what those implementation pathways could be. As we move towards county recommendations, we'll start digging deeper into specific pathways and analysis. So just this analysis that was done by the consultants is just to give the framework, the basic baseline, but there is a lot more that needs to be done, but that becomes more relevant as we start getting specific to particular technologies and solutions that we can start looking at implementation. And we're looking for things that we can work together on that we cannot, in this particular regional decarbonization framework, that we cannot do individually, either as one government entity or one private stakeholder. So that is, that's a really good point. It's worth bringing this up again as we move towards implementation. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Kendall. Thanks, Marissa. And another good reminder is knowing there are multiple public agency representatives here listening and participating. There are other parts of this process in developing this framework that are involving kind of, agency to agency level collaboration around looking at what can be done jointly and collaboratively, because one county of San Diego government agency or one city or even one regional agency cannot do this alone. So this is going to be a long-term sustained collaborative effort. Dare I say, in a scale we've all not frequently seen. So we'll need to continue that pace and that collaborative work. So very good. So I see a few more questions coming in. Thanks again to the team for responding. And I noted a couple questions, again, are related to some other aspects of the regional decarbonization framework, such as carbon sequestration, which we'll be addressing next week in our land use focus workshop, for example. There's also a separate sector-based workshop coming up on buildings and industry as well. A little further down the line too, by the way, we'll have one focused on jobs, workforce development. We've already heard some commentary on that today. So again, we recognize all this needs to be studied and analyzed together, but we're dedicating these sector workshops as today is to be able to dive deep on these specifics here today. So thanks again for working with this format. So good, a lot of great detail coming in. I want to thank everybody for offering more insights into the methodology and how we can consider to refine that overall. It's really, really valuable and helpful for us. So, let me, speaking of these other workshops, I'm not moving to ending the meeting right now, but I do want to reference for you a little bit more about those next steps and what else we have available as part of this process moving forward. So again, some of you I know, I recognize, joined us at one of our first community, recent community meeting, I should say, which was on March 24. Those are intended to welcome any and all community members from all walks of life in our region to learn more and engage in regional decarbonization framework. And we know it can be very technical and complex for many people. We really orient those workshops to really try and speak to the broadest audience we can. And of course, we're here in a sector workshop today, April 7th, focused on energy, arguably a little bit more technically oriented. And I know many of you as attendees, this is part of your profession, your advocacy. So we very much geared these sector workshops to that finer detail. So thank you for working on that. And again, as you note by the dates here, April 14, 21, 28, and May 5, you see our subsequent sector focus workshops we'll have. You're all welcome to join. Those are open public meetings. Anyone's welcome to join. We're also excited about launching the speaker series, more to come with the guests that the team is assembling. Really to kind of bring in, again, outside voices, outside experts that, well, we have just an amazing project team here. There are many more voices, efforts happening across the world when it comes to decarbonization. We're endeavoring to bring them in to add further thoughts and ideas and to this big conversation that we're all having around decarbonization. But also back to direct engagement meetings and presentations, more one-on-one engagement. And for those of you who've asked more about, again, what does that interjurisdictional collaboration look like? Those engagement meetings are certainly part of that picture of closer formalized engagement between public agencies, utilities, other key partners to really talk about the nuts and bolts of the how, if you will. What will we need to do for policy program shifting overall in the long term to be able to make, get the outcomes we're looking for from collaboration. Of course, pop-up community events, looking forward to getting out again into the broader community, connecting with all community members where we can, really, small touch points to make people aware of this process, this effort, this opportunity, get them some brief education and make sure they're aware how they can get more closely involved. And then we're looking a little further ahead into the summer, where what we're calling these regional convenings for implementation. So we're seeing, again, focus with public officials, executive staff, policymakers, to really talk more intentionally about what should we be pursuing in terms of implementation pathways. Today, we've looked at potential scenarios, right? Potential pathways. Those regional convenings, we're aiming to start to hone in a little bit more intentionally around what can we start to do to make some intentional, kind of directions around potential policy making. So I wanted to just take the opportunity to catch you all up and remind you about the kind of multi-pronged effort here that's underway, these many points for involvement overall. I just want to thank you all in advance too, for those of you who've been helping to spread the word, not just kind of leaning on the county to be able to do this, to get the word out. This does need to be collaborative. We encourage you to use your communication channels to make your constituents, the broader community, aware of this process. So thank you in advance for anything and everything you've done so far to this point. But we'll continue to do to that end. So just want to take the opportunity to update you all there. But again, we still have just under an hour. We don't need to go all the way till 4, but wanted to make sure we're checking in and see more about any other specific input, kind of again, reflection on the data we've seen today, these takeaways, or more thoughts about next steps and methodologies. Happy to hear those from you. Again, thank you for using the chat. It's a great way for us to collect and record all this information. So good. Let's see. Again, I think, yes, a lot of good reference here. Yes, more follow-up to come overall. So for example, per Sonia, your question, I think more detail we'll be able to look at is some of those additional events that we just reviewed, either at the higher level of community meetings, but perhaps also to some extent through speaker series, but probably moving towards the latter part of the summer, looking more intently about what may be emerging to the top around specific in the energy sector. So good. Any other reflections? Let me come to Murtaza, if you don't mind. I wanted to check in with you. Any other reflections or responses you want to offer to any of the comments or questions coming in so far you wanted to offer to the group?
And just Sonia had a question, and this is whether there was going to be a part 2. of this. And this is a question that I have back to the group is how much and how often we need to be meeting in order to transition from the study stage to the implementation stage, because this is kind of these sectoral pathways are going to be critical to kind of establishing where the implementation is and whether the results we achieve are actually going to be measurable, we can account, and they're accountable, that we're holding ourselves accountable, but also making sure that they're implemented. One of the limitations of the, for example, climate action plans that Scott has done is, besides the fact that even after all those commitments, we're barely halfway there by 2035 in reaching our regional decarbonization goals. Even within that, we struggle to account for actual implementation within those climate action plan goals. So it's a good place to be in to discuss policy, but at the same time, we got to convert this into a discussion about specific implementation pathways. So therefore, the answer here is that this month we want to focus on studying what the studies are shown, and then moving forward, we want to start thinking about how we're gonna discuss implementation.
Great, there's a thank you. Bill, I see your hand up. Yeah, go ahead. Did you have more follow-up you want to offer? Should be able to unmute, Bill.
Okay. Well, I've sort of been chatting along with this, but you probably know that the SDG&E report came out recently on, it was sort of a statewide look at how to decarbonize by 2045, although it did have some subset issues about the SDG&E region. But some of the things that they're finding is they project by 2045, the overall statewide transportation component of GHG emissions needs to be halved, reduced in half by 2040, I think it is. But they also show this kind of startling issue that they still expect by 2045 that there needs to be a huge amount of carbon capture, because in their analysis, you can't get to zero carbon emissions. So it's going to require a substantial amount of carbon capture, which, as we all know, is currently not an efficient, not an effective, not a usable system. And yeah, we've got 25 years to get there. We may, but just I want to. How are you viewing? How is this group, the RDF group, viewing other white papers and things like that that are coming out of reputable organizations like UCSD? Contribute a lot to that plan as well as some to this plan.
Mm-hmm. Very good, thank you. Yeah, so to Bill's question, Murtaza, maybe you can jump in. So in addition to the team, the counties assembled to inform this effort, what about concurrent scientific analysis studies? How is this process incorporating or reviewing, or at least tracking?
Sorry, Andy. I'm not sure I get the question, but I can probably ask if Scott's team, there are some of you are tracking this work from the policy perspective.
Yeah, Murtaza, maybe I can offer a start, and then maybe one of my EPIC colleagues can jump in. But so Bill, this particular report of this particular workshop is on the electric side, but on the broader technical report, there is a chapter on natural climate solutions. So there is some treatment of ways to remove carbon using natural systems like trees or wetland restoration or things like that. So that's covered, and there's reference to engineered technologies like direct air capture, but there's no analysis done, I don't think, in this report. interestingly, Evolved Energy, who did the energy analysis for this, did recently do an analysis looking at carbon removal technologies. So you might want to check that out. But our team is tracking internally here at EPIC some of the work that's happening at the state level around SB 27 and 30 by 30 executive order around sequestration and removal. And we can say that there's some activity, not a ton happening at the state level yet. But as you know, this is a kind of a longer term strategy, this removal and long-term storage. So yeah, tracking it, not addressed in a significant way in this report, but I think it's something that we have to keep our eye on and keep watching because the IPCC report came out earlier this week suggesting that some level of carbon removal is likely needed in the out years to stay below 1.5 degrees.
Thank you. And thank you for that. So I think, let me also offer too, I replaced the link into the chat for the ENGAGE webpage. I just want to offer that to everyone too, that if you are finding data you think may not be kind of considered or other white papers, other analyses that you want to offer to the team, please do use that website to be able to funnel that information to the team. That'll be helpful. I know they'll appreciate receiving that as well. So, and then Sonia, absolutely want to come back, and I wanted to respond to I was just going to respond to your follow-up question in the chat about, how we may adjust community outreach, if and when new information comes forward. And I think it's safe to say, I'll dare say on behalf of the county, your answer is yes, very open to a kind of adjusting approach about how we'll engage the community when new information is available and how we'll share that information overall. So, but let me go ahead, please unmute and share any specific suggestions you want to offer the team about what that can look like. Be happy to hear it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that information was actually included in the chat by Bill Powers. And so I was just curious because if the plan has the non-residential rooftop priced at 90 something, I think $92, a megawatt hour, but then NREL, shows as recent as 2020 that cost point is actually $44 a megawatt hour. That makes a big difference as far as what the county looks at when they're looking at their scenarios, as well as for their building out their implementation and what the community wants in general. So if the community is focused on having local generated power to eliminate and avoid any transmission costs, then that price point becomes very significant. So my question is, will the plan update their analysis on newfound information in order for the scenarios to be reintroduced and shared with the community, as well as they're moving concurrently on their implementation timeline?
Very good. Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that, explaining that question a little bit more. Yeah, Murtaza, maybe you can start and your thoughts on as data, changes, evolves, as we, things are updated, adjusted, any sense as to how, I know it's safe to say this team will definitely continue to update data where, when new data comes available that, feeds into this process and within the methodology, but any other perspective about, that you can offer about that?
Yeah, just that, and Sonia, thank you. This is it's really immensely helpful to have this kind of civic engagement to provide us policy direction and to have our elected leaders grapple with these kind of difficult problems. The data that is there is a resource for the community. The data that was generated as part of this project, the studies, the drafts are all there. This is going to be the third draft, but it's not just about the data. It is, once again, when we get into from a macro level to project specific implementation, there will be trade-offs and considerations that have to be made on a policy level that we go to our board for. And that is where we will be utilizing this, but also utilizing having your input, the analysis that you put in as a resource there, which is why we also had the technical working group. So we have everybody's comments there. So when we do have the framework, you can look at what comments were made on that work, including the limitations of the research that were done. So based upon that, we then get into the implementation. It's intended to be a collaborative, but also peer-checked, peer-reviewed process. So we were doing science-based, fact-based decisions in how we make these policy decisions, but nonetheless, it still is a collaboration between cities, regional agencies, business, labor, environmental advocates, folks that want to make our region a better place.
Thank you. So I thank you. Yeah, and Sonia, thank you for asking the question, and Marissa for that response. And I think is, again, as things continue to change, evolve, new information comes to the fore, either through this study, through other sources. Yeah, we just thank you all in advance for continuing to bring that forward and sharing that and asking hard questions about assumptions and methodologies and cost estimates and the presumption around some of those and what went into them. And yeah, it will continue to be an evolving process, but as Meredith has said, you know, at the end of the day, we'll continue to try and move towards more certainty as much as reasonably possible with the data that we have in this process. So thank you all for that. Sonia, did you want to come back again? Was there a, yeah, go ahead, please.
Actually, it's not for me. I want to ask if you can unmute Bill Powers. I think his reaction button wasn't working.
Oh, okay, sure. Bill, go ahead. Did you want to, you should be able to unmute, Bill, are you?
Yeah, thank you for letting me speak for just a few seconds, and thank you, Murtaza. But you know, when we talk about fact-based, that's actually what my comments are about. I mean, if you're using a commercial rooftop solar price that's double what the current market is, if you're assuming transmission will cost 89 million, when to move a lot of renewable energy, it will cost 3.7 billion. You at a minimum have to band it. You can use your base number, but you've got to band it, because if you don't, you leave the impression that going remote and big is hands down the best way to go. And so without that band, I don't think it's fact-based. And so I think we may be forced to write a letter if there's not footnotes or something in here that says, hey, there's a huge band here, and we're looking somewhere in that band, as opposed to here is the fact-based 2022 conclusion, and we'll update it with better information in the future. We have better information. We just put it in. I'd like to see a banded sensitivity, and that's all. That's the extent of my comment.
Great, Bill. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and as we're at, it's another, again, from a process perspective, as we're still relatively early, right, in terms of starting to formulate potential scenarios of what might, you know, speak to the future of how we move forward to decarbonize. It's important we're thoughtful about these details matter. So how we're not just from a data scientific perspective, but also from a expectation setting and public awareness and understanding setting as well. So thank you for helping to make sure we're thoughtful about these details. So, all right, good. Well, just as a heads up to everybody, again, we're doing well on time. It's 3:25. I want to respect all of your time. Don't necessarily want to keep everybody here to the full time if we've kind of exhausted things. I know these are conversations we could be going, we could have an all day, we can have a week-long workshop, I know. So, but with that, we want to be, we just want to kind of give a heads up at our remaining time. I see Corey, it'd be great to hear from you here, but also just before Corey comes on, want to kind of ask if anybody else had any additional comments or questions, now's the time to bring them forward, because we are heading towards the end point of the workshop. So Corey, you should be able to unmute yourself. Go ahead. What did you want to weigh in on?
Thanks for this meeting. You know, two items I just wanted to raise were, it's been referenced a number of times, the analysis of climate action plans and where they kind of, or that they don't reach the goals that the state's looking to do. And, you know, one thing I just wanted to mention on there is, you know, a lot of the climate action plans were created in the past, and it's really challenging to look forward and see, you know, especially like what the state or federal is going to do in 2030, 2035. For Chula Vista, you know, our climate action plan was created and that's currently adopted, was created in 2014. So, you know, there is definitely just a knowledge gap that comes from not having the ability to accurately model these actions that the state wants to take in the future. And then the other question I had was if there's any political analysis of some of these, the feasibility of some of these projects. You know, one thing that I was really excited to see San Diego Community Power locate some pretty sizable renewable energy projects in San Diego County. But they, you know, it was not without controversy. And so, you know, I just wonder if that is, if there's any way to incorporate that in the analysis that we do.
Excellent. So thank you very much for that. Mirza, I'll come to you first to that question that Corey asked. What are your thoughts on kind of more the...
This is, yes, this is a good time to have Scott kind of give some closing comments here, because there's a lot of research here we're putting in, and sometimes we can't squeeze it all in this time period. So we were kind of staggering some of this analysis and research into different workshops. But Scott, if you want to just give a big picture overview, go ahead.
Of Mirza, of the political aspect of this?
Like in terms of the landscape of how the caps kind of, you know, missed the target, and then you have this analysis of, right.
Yeah, so I mean, I think you know, I mean, I think Corey, your comment is generally correct, right? The caps were never really, you know, no cap has a net zero binding target or even aspirational target, although we're seeing that coming through City of San Diego, potential other jurisdictions. And so, you know, maybe it's a bit unfair that, you know, one of the findings was that the county, the caps in the county don't get us to the state targets because they were never intended to get to the state targets. So I think that's a fair point. And we tried to make that point clear as well in our chapter. So yeah, I think that's a good point. Looking forward to what the state and federal governments are going to do in all of these things. Sorry, I realized I didn't have my video on. What the state and federal governments are going to do with respect to all of these things. I think you're right. That's also, there's some uncertainty around that. And we need to monitor and track and, you know, plan accordingly, or at least using the best available information and data. But I don't know that I can speak to the political piece of this, Mirza. I think, you know, citing anything, anywhere in San Diego County is always going to be, there's going to be a political element to it.
Yeah.
To be done in the future. We'll talk about in some other, particularly as we go towards regional convening. Corey, that's a good question.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you very much. Good. I want to also acknowledge, yeah, again, if you have not submitted a comment or question, now's the time to do it as we're approaching near the end point of our workshop. But I wanted to, Rob Howard, you've been waiting. You should be able to unmute yourself if you wanted to. Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I wanted to, I apologize because I didn't get to the first hour, but in these conversations, the things that are just frustrating for me is that a couple of areas of how we integrate communities that typically whenever we have massive change get left out, how we're focused on solar and the fight over direct access and things like that, yet we're expecting workers who work in these industries to give up everything because we need to change. I'm not saying we don't need to make change, but how do we get to a point and ensure that the average worker is not the one who is giving or having the sacrifice, that we also look at the natural things we can do? Because I guess my frustration is not everyone, that would be inappropriate to say. I hear a lot of silver bullet requests, and it's not. And how do we change the conversation to be more inclusive? Because those in the environmental community are in a minority when, if we focused on right now issues, bad air, bad water, and then work with those communities as we're improving it to talk about that this is a direct effect on our environment, and grow the number of people and include workers and have a real transition plan for them. And I guess maybe because it's more of a global conversation, but how do we make sure we're more inclusive of those that will be directly affected? And let's get into a perspective of let's try everything, because we have to make change, and we're not going to do it if it has to be my idea.
Right.
And that was a lot, and
That's
I apologize, but
no problem.
if you covered that, I apologize for that. But to me, this is too critical to stay in our tribes.
Yeah. Thank you, Rob. Appreciate that sentiment. And I'll offer a couple quick initial responses for you. First of all, yes, many people as part of this process have been echoing your sentiments. Big picture, if I may, big picture equity. How are we being thoughtful overall and intentional in studying the effects, not only the effects of these impacts, but the effects and benefits and impacts of these changes to our economy that we may be making as this study is considering. And I'll offer you at least one specific thing, Rob, specific to this study. With all the analyses being done, one of those being done is called a workforce development study. That's being developed to really look at the impacts. If we're looking to change our economy to a decarbonized economy, what are the impacts and potential solutions to addressing from a workforce perspective, particularly those folks who work in areas such as natural gas, for example, just as one of many factors. So Rob, I wanted to offer that to you. That's at least one aspect of this study to address that. And then I'd also offer more broadly too that broader community engagement, in this effort is so important and critical. And before we wrap this workshop, I'm going to recap some of the upcoming next steps about, how this effort is going to be continue to extend a broad reach, particularly to those communities that aren't normally involved and may have the most potentially to lose, if not, a fair bit to gain if we do this right, from an equity lens. So, excuse me, that's a little bit of a long answer on my part. Hopefully that spoke to at least some of what you were addressing. So, and by the way, today's workshop was very specific to the energy sector, like the energy technical analysis of 4 sectors. So we were a little bit of a narrower view today in this workshop, but we definitely are looking at a broader view too. So anyway, I want to offer that to you and thank you for the comments and the passion around this, because I know there are other people on this call today and on other calls who are echoing those sentiments. So thank you very much. Good, and then let's see, I think Mike, you should be able to unmute yourself. What did you want to weigh in? And I do want to talk more about, to what I promised Rob, I want to talk more about next steps for everybody.
Yeah, I want to comment on the earlier speaker who talked about climate action plans becoming outdated. And that's really true because the climate scientists are always learning. It seems like it's always bad news that things are progressing faster than they had hoped they would. And the other point that has to be made, because people aren't making this distinction, state mandates may or may not be enough to stabilize the climate. What's actually important is what the climate scientists are saying. And if the state's not in line with what the climate scientists are saying, that's on us, the voters, to demand that our state get realistic and get in line with what the climate scientists are saying. And what they're saying is the very first occurring climate stabilizing requirement is in 2030. So the county is not helping when they focus on 2035 and then they focus on 0 out there later. So climate action plans should be climate stabilization plans. The statement needs to be stated over and over again that human survival requires climate stabilization.
Okay.
And if that doesn't shake people up, say avoiding mass starvation requires climate stabilization. At some point, perhaps people will get curious. Hey, what is this thing, climate stabilization? What is that about? Well, it's the opposite of destabilization, and you have to give some examples of that and how that threatens us. And there's no doubt the latest articles on the front page of the UT just a couple of days ago made it very clear we are on a path to destabilize the climate. And getting off that path requires a lot more seriousness than what I see. And, you know, we're just not grabbing this thing and being honest about what we're confronting. This is a war. And my friend Rob was talking about equity. There's no equity if we fail and destabilize the climate. And make no mistake about it, the first people that will starve will be the people that can't afford $150 for a loaf of bread, which is what happens as we destroy our habitat and cannot, you know, the amount of food we grow contracts and contracts. You know, the billionaires will starve last. And the people with low amount of money, destitute folks, you know, they're going to be in big trouble first.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, only elevate. I know I'm going to dare say I don't think anybody here disagrees with you, Mike. Absolutely. That again, another example of the interconnectedness of these really big issues that we're grappling with here, whether it's from a decarbonization lens, again, to climate change and those impacts, and as I think everybody here knows that connection, and how we can do better to continue to tell that story to the broader community overall, our friends and neighbors, and is going to be really critical to be able to continue to make traction overall. So good, as we're heading into the final minutes of the workshop, I do want to recap. Most of you I think saw this, but at least for the benefit of clarifying a couple things, I do want to quickly highlight, particularly to Rob's point. I also wanted to acknowledge some comments that came up earlier. I believe it was Susan Wayo was asking about how you know, different efforts that are out there can link into community engagement for this effort. And the short answer is we'd love to find opportunities to do that. And I know, Susan, you're in touch with the RDF team. I think for any of you who are out there conducting community engagement on affiliated issues around decarbonization, the county RDF team wants to have a conversation with you about how you can be mutually supportive. Absolutely. So, so those community engagement efforts, such as community pop-up events, we can definitely explore ways about how information from this effort might be able to link with all of your organizations, everything you're doing. Please do reach out directly to the team members, the RDF team, to have that conversation. And Rob Howard, I wanted to make sure I was clear, more specifics for you about engagement opportunities. For example, as you were mentioned, concerned around jobs and workforce development, we have a specific sector workshop like this one, right? Kind of very laser focused on jobs on May 5, scheduled on May 5th. So definitely would encourage and ask you to participate and engage in that, and encourage others to. That'll be an in-depth discussion, similar to what this conversation was about. Technical details around energy, we want to have a technical detail conversation around jobs, workforce, economic development as well on the 5th. Not only on that date, but definitely on May 5th. But again, want to stress the broader community meetings as you see there. Definitely have conversations around what decarbonized economy means for broader way of life for all community members, but particularly with a focus and concern on social equity as well. And again, as we mentioned, those pop-up community events that we'll be doing this summer, we'll get out there and try and connect with people when they're least expecting it. Farmers markets, tabling events, street fairs, things like that. We're going to really try and connect with a broader range of community members. But again, I know as many of you are focused on implementation, knowing complex policy change is going to be necessary. Regional convenings around implementation are going to be, I think, are going to be critical places where some of those conversations will have a more, ideally a more meaningful focus on so what that's going to look like among executives and policymakers in our region overall. So, so absolutely. So appreciate everybody's time and focus here. I want to go ahead and bring Mirza back. Mirza, if you don't mind, just for some closing remarks before we send everybody off for the rest of their afternoon. I know we talked about next steps. I want to again remind everybody in the chat, we have the link to the project webpage for the regional decarbonization effort. please just stay in touch there. You'll find all the links to RSVP for all the upcoming meetings that we have scheduled so far. Please dial in and connect with those. But before that, I wanted to, again, check in with Murtaza, thoughts here about what we've heard today and kind of closing remarks before we send everybody off.
Thank you, Andy. We're very encouraged by the turnout for this and looking forward to the other workshops. I think that the demand was there, that we needed to have a substantive discussion. What we need to do is just in terms of continuation of this outreach into the community, but nonetheless, we'll also organize a broader effort around the larger community events and to educate, to inform, and to bring along everybody that has not been brought along yet in terms of how we discuss the bigger questions regarding, frankly, our survival, but also our economic future, because we're optimistic that we can do this, that we will have a brighter, greener future if we can get this right. And we are a region, we can work together. We know each other pretty well. So we look forward to a collaborative way forward. So with that, on that optimistic note, I'll turn it back to Andy.
All right, thank you very much. Well, again, I want to thank everybody for your time and participation here today. I think it's safe to sign off a little before 4 o'clock. I think we've offered a few last calls and heard from everybody. The chat's kind of a little more on the quiet side, but again, I do want to note in the chat, again, the links to 2 different web sources that are available to all of you. An email address, zerocarbon@sdcounty.ca.gov. Please, again, please connect and link in through those sources. Overall, stay in touch, stay involved. Please encourage others to connect and get involved here. We just thank you in advance for helping to spread the word and doing that. And continue to let the RDF team know if you have more ideas about how we can continue to get the word out, get people connected, engaged in this process. We want to hear them. This is not going to be a short effort and with easy, quick solutions. This is, as you all know, it's a long-term ongoing process. We're going to need sustained effort with everybody's help. So thank you all in advance for that. And for that, I think we'll say officially now, goodbye. Have a great rest of your afternoon. We'll see you next week at 2 o'clock next Thursday for the next workshop on our next topic, focused on, let's see, land use next week, right? I think we have. So please do sign up through the links we provided there. Get your RSVP in so you can get the Zoom link, and we will see you there, and we'll talk then. Take care. Have a great rest of your week and have a great weekend. Bye, everybody. Thank you.